something that needs to be argued. If you really do think the warriors of the future would be placed in the right spot, planning for the worst possible scenario in order to prevail. The second one, and I say this, is, and I've spoken about it, I guess, is the pirates. I'm always taken how easy it is to move the Navy forces into any place, but we're relatively hard to move out. So we went for the first time, as I remember, with any permanent presence in 1974 with a ship to the Persian Gulf. And a battle group showed up, I think, in 78 or 79. I've forgotten, Peter, where on the dates were. And then we got a carrier battle group in there 24/7. But today, the image, if a ship is taken down, again, off the coast of Somalia, I've always remembered as I worked, that we had in Somalia a force that was intended to do something. It wasn't the right force when we changed our mission. And the impact when the Rangers, Black Hawk Down, occurred, the impact upon the perception and even the reality of what our force posture then was to be was immense, as 6 months later we were gone. Maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, but it was because we were not well prepared. And I also believe the Navy has a mission there where it can never be done again that a perception that the United States presence would ever let the dog bark again, to where we may not be as successful, and then by a crisis we're forced to move our forces there. So when I talk about posture, I think the flexibility of the Navy to go somewhere and then to move somewhere else more flexibly, even though it isn't what a war in a typical means is, it's a piracy. But that's why we were built initially. I think the perception, if we have another takedown that does not go well upon what our Navy is out and about doing, can be not insignificant. I'll close by three last issues. Strategic vision. Do numbers matter, and can there be more than 260 whatever, or 270 today? 270 today? Yes. But what's the strategic vision that the naval force brings forward? I would argue that the numbers could be different. They may, if argued for in the joint or interagency way. Let me talk first about sea basing. For some time now, we have, the last few years, looked at sea basing, and which may be right, but I think a decision needs to be made. Is sea basing more LPD-17s, more well decks? They come and they go, you lay them out, you roll across the beach in different ways, or is sea basing something to where it really is a joint capability? To where it's not how you package it and then it rolls out that way a few miles off the beach, but it truly is an image of where the Army and the Marine Corps are basically ones on different large types of vessels from the sea. I am one of those that think our bases forward will attrit over time to more ad hoc, on-call types of bases, or those that come from the sea. And I would argue that going back to where some felt sea basing was one built upon larger vessels, where you could actually move around tanks or ACVs or whatever, to one where there were connectors to be done, is an image that is expensive, but it can, in this future world, be justified as a necessity. I think of the time I kept a $1 billion DDG sitting off the coast of Somalia. No, not Somalia. Yemen. For 4 months, with a Tomahawk at the launch, ready to get one terrorist. 4 months, $1 billion platform, doing nothing but waiting for some oiler to come by to give it enough fuel for the next few weeks. We finally took it off that mission, and eventually they moved a UAV in there. This hit the papers later. And finally just put a UAV over, because the guy would always just be, he wouldn't be right there. We know he was within a mile, but that's not good enough for the Tomahawk. But the ability for the unmanned air vehicle to locate and get him, and they did. But that type of from the sea effort, for one terrorist or larger for a nuclear loose nuke grab, in my mind, is one where we don't have the right vessels for that type of joint capability. And sea-based, in my mind, bodes that type of strategic vision in a joint way. The second is ballistic missile defense. Without going into the overarching arguments of DDG 1000, which I'm happy to during questions and answers, and Aegis, the DDG 51, I was always struck by the speech, as by the letter allegedly that President Obama wrote to the President of Russia, where he allegedly said, we'll give you the missiles, take the missiles out of Poland, and you put pressure on Iran. I was taken with that because a few months earlier I had gone through the IDA study, and then CBO or CRS did a song similar. Eric, I think it was CBO, can't remember. And they said, you know, for no additional cost except some software upgrades, which Secretary Gates announced, if you noticed, in his speech for Aegis, you can have the same de minimis, I'll agree, because anybody who knows the system, it's a very poor system that we're placing in Europe as far as robust capability. But you get the same capability from the Aegis cruisers. In fact, you get more. Cover all of Southern Europe and Israel, where the other does not. So I'm taken with it in a sense that there is another mission, a strategic vision, where you begin to see the Navy talking about 80 of these Aegis ships being moved around the world to be able to protect this nation and our allies. Numbers in that case, in an interagency way, don't only bode for defense, it bodes for what the Navy does best: political, military affairs. We're painted gray for a reason. We're not black, we're not white. We always grew up at sea, never knowing whether that blinder or backfire, what were they called? Black finders and bears. Backfire, thank you. If they flew over you, did you take them or did you not take them? We always were the service that lived in the gray world, having to make a judgment if it was an act of war or just tension. We were always a tool of diplomacy, from ink sea agreements to others. Once again, in the world, for example, of ballistic missile defense, it's not as much to just defend. You can get something for how you use in your strategic vision of this service. So I'll stop in summary to say, I fear we have the wrong measure of capability. How many? And not just for the Navy. The right answer we know is what capability, but how do you measure it? Well, there are tools to begin at least you thinking along this line. And the modeling that was done down in J8 for a number of years under Haas Cartwright, and the modeling that the Navy did for a few years, and I assume still does, begins to say that you can see what trade-offs are within a joint force if you posture and you do things differently. And what value is another ounce or another bite in the cyberspace world as compared to another hull. I have met many warriors who said, if I just knew who that was, I'd trade, in my case, an Aegis cruiser to have had an unmanned air vehicle flying all times around my ships. I kept a helicopter flying 24/7 when I was in the Persian Gulf as my cap. F-18 was of no use to me, not in that environment. I needed to know. And so I think trying to change that is not really just a challenge for the Navy, the military, or industry. It's a challenge for Congress. I told you at the beginning of this, and I'll end the same way, that I went to Sea Power because they moved the V-22 there. I had been there, done it, did the Navy, didn't want anyone to think I was coming back to play again, because the Chief of Naval Operations is responsible at the end of the day. But we should, as per the Constitution, provide for the common defense by doing some judicious review, by tough questioning, but understanding that, you know, by and large, they should be given the benefit of the doubt.